I'm Tosh Semlacher from Driveline Baseball. Today we're going to be doing a roundtable discussion specifically on scouting and recruiting in the unique times that we're facing today. We've got quite a few people here. We got Tanner Stokey, Colin Hetzler, and Bill Heasel from Driveline, Sean Duncan and Brandon Hall from PBR. We got Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball. We also have Nate Yeskie from University of Arizona and Derek Simmons from Indiana University. So thanks to all y'all for being on here. Really excited to have this conversation. So we can go ahead and get started. So yesterday, the NCAA, they came out with an announcement to kind of further the recruiting freeze, and that's going to extend it through the month of June. So the biggest thing is, like, what are your reactions? What do you think are the most immediate effects to come from that? And I guess maybe, Kendall, you want to get us started on that one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things at stake here from an NCAA standpoint. You've got the recruiting calendar obviously being extended until the end of June. Certainly, Sean will have some pretty good thoughts on that. The other thing to kind of keep an eye on from an NCAA perspective, I was just talking to someone at the NCAA this morning, and it sounds like the roster management issues that we kind of expect in college baseball may not even be talked about at the meeting later. I think it's middle of next week. Apparently, they have a pretty full agenda, and that may have to wait till the beginning of June. So there's just a lot of things from a college baseball perspective, Tosh, that are very much in limbo right now. I think this recruiting thing will be very interesting. Coaches now will have a very small window in order to recruit, and I think if you're the NCAA during this next month this deadline, this moratorium goes on, I think the NCAA honestly needs to look at the recruiting calendar for the rest of the year and kind of manipulate it a little bit. I mean, if you're getting one less month to go out and recruit, hey, let's do some of the recruiting calendar the rest of the year to where you can kind of make up for that lost time. So I'll be very intrigued to see if the NCAA will kind of consider that. And I'm going to actually be asking them about that later today, about whether or not they're looking at potentially tweaking the existing, rules for the rest of the year because of this, because it's certainly a, unprecedented event. So we'll see what happens.
You would think naturally, Kendall, that they would – what they took back from the fall of the year before, they lobbed off like those 3 weeks, and usually it would run through like the first weekend of November. They would at least bring that back, and the fall would play a bigger role. But then again, the fall is when the sky is supposed to fall again, round 2, right? So Who knows?
One thing I've been kind of curious about, we can kind of get Nate's take on this, and even Derek can kind of chime in from an Indiana perspective. But one of the things a coach told me a couple weeks ago was he's actually kind of found the recruiting process a little like interesting, because whereas you guys would go to games and then go home and try to catch a guy before he goes to bed at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, now you kind of have all day to prepare and get correspondence for some of these recruits. So how have things kind of changed for Derek, your staff there in Indiana, and Nate also, just from your perspective at U of A?
Yeah, no, for us, it's definitely helped a lot, because we have a ton of time on our hands. We have specific kids that call us at different times throughout the day. So, typically from that 12 to 8 o'clock at night, I'm pretty much on call. So, it definitely helps a lot, having this time, but at the same time, it's really tough to evaluate.
Yeah, I think it's had its challenges that we're all experiencing, but there are some benefits as well. Derek touched on that, where there's a window of time to connect with those guys. And I know, Kendall, you mentioned that, but certainly with things such as PBR and other forms of social media that are out there, it's made it easy for us, I think, to organize and prioritize some of the kids and some of the areas that we're looking at. The draft will certainly, I think, have some implications with how that's going to play out, being in a condensed fashion. We'll probably see a lot of talent making it to campus. So how that changes the dynamic of how we're going to recruit moving forward, we'll have some challenges too. But, it certainly it's going to be like anything else. There's going to be some benefits. There's going to be some drawbacks and setbacks from those things. So we're looking at it right now, we're all in the same boat. So I guess if you want recruiting to be pretty even, this is about as level of a playing field as you can possibly create.
I have a question. There's kind of in that same light, but with the draft only being 5 rounds this year, like how would that change a coach's recruiting strategy, especially for like a couple programs that are, Power 5 that are going to have draft guys every year, and then like what would someone's like a coach's advice be to someone that may have been like a 9th or 10th rounder that probably isn't going to go in the top 5 anymore, but still has aspirations for pro ball, but at the same time feels a little slighted for like, being able to sign for a maximum of 20 grand. Like, how do you guys think that's going to affect the recruiting season for probably the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think you're going to prioritize who your key guys are and where you feel like you're going to have some changes at the top that are pretty significant. We've got a young man here on campus, swings the bat well, catches behind the plate, does those things, and we know that he's most likely moving on. So that position becomes a priority for us to fill with the incoming class. What does that look like behind that guy? And so you start getting a better sense of how those things kind of unfold. That kind of 9th, 10th rounder that you mentioned, I think this is a great time for him from a player development standpoint. I think you pick up any Twitter, Instagram, what have you, and you're seeing kids now throwing harder and harder at younger ages. I was having this discussion just yesterday with a guy where I don't think you're seeing a lot of the external stressors that have come into play, where kids are playing late at night, if they're traveling a lot, if they're doing a lot of things. Kids are at home, they're getting their rest, they're doing the things that they need to get proper nutrition and develop. So we're seeing those guys kind of spike up. So now it's changed the way we look at some of those things too, because you're looking at a 16-year-old differently now, because he's throwing 93 as opposed to, maybe a kid that was playing shortstop on a certain day. He was out playing, he got sick, you didn't get a chance to see him that good. So it's just how all these things tie together is the challenge. And I think every school is going to connect those dots a little bit differently, but I also think there's going to be some overlap where we're going to see this thing probably more clearly in a year's time, certainly 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yeah, Nate, I was going to ask. Oh, go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Nate. I think for us, we probably don't have a top 5 rounder this year on our team currently, but that, is definitely going to affect other recruiting classes down the road. It's going to kind of push some things back for us with, pretty much our entire team coming back. So, you look at recruiting classes and who we have coming in, this is definitely a tricky situation for us, especially with the draft, with it only being 5 rounds now. So, for us right now, we're just trying to manage it. We're just trying to see, if we do have anybody that goes in that top 5 round, and then 2, what's going to happen with the one-time transfer exception. So, for us, we're just kind of sitting back and kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen, just like everybody else.
Kendall, wait till your waiver wire, that's the transfer portal after the draft. Look what that thing's going to explode.
It's going to be interesting. I will say though, I don't think these guys are going to have to worry about the one-time transfer waiver. My understanding is that's not going to pass right now. The board of directors came out, a week and a half ago or so, saying they didn't think it should be passed right now. And usually it's kind of like if the board of directors and NCAA say it shouldn't pass, it's not going to pass. So I would expect that to probably pass in January at this point. And though I think it's well chronicled that I'm very much for the one-time transfer because of being a partial scholarship sport, I'm totally fine with not doing it during all this, just because, man, it'd be the wild, wild west. One thing I was going to ask you, and sorry to interject here a little bit, but Nate, I was going to ask you, just because like you deal with pitchers, Tosh and myself and Aaron kind of spoke about this the other day in a podcast, but what kind of programs are you kind of giving your pitchers during all this? Because, there's some kids, you see video of them in their backyard, and they've got a big elaborate net structure. They've got a they got a big, personal mound, whereas there may be some kids that don't have any of that. So, like, what are you guys kind of telling pitchers right now in terms of just their work regimen?
Well, I think for our guys, we're trying to take just a very wide perspective with what this looks like over the next 18 months and how we're going to manage those in really kind of 3-month windows, giving them a sense of what it's going to look like through the duration of the summer, how that's going to transition into the fall, and then preparing themselves for the spring. I think kind of what you're talking to, Kendall, you're looking at, I think there's 3 levels of players that are out there. I think you've got the elite guys. Kind of looks like a bell curve. You've got the elite guys that are in a pretty good position. They know what they're doing. They're using their time wisely. And even the draft guys this year, they know who they are, so they're just kind of staying the course. You've got the guys in the middle who there's some gray area. They've got to kind of figure out how they're going to push themselves to the front of the line and what they need to do. So you have some conversations with those guys and give them some insight into where they can start making some of those adjustments. And then they're either going to do it or they're not, because they're on their own accord at this point. And then you've got the bottom or the other side of that curve, if you will, where you look at it and you say, okay, well, there's going to be some guys that jump up out of there and turn themselves into a guy that has a chance to continue to play at the next level. So certainly there's different training avenues out there for guys. And I think that how they use their time and how they balance out those things that are relative to their development are the most important. So back to our guys, and I'm sure I'm not too far off with regards to how other schools are choosing to do the same, or even other organizations, is trying to do with the best that you have. And as a coach, realistically, your job is to make yourself less and less necessary. It's just an extension of parenting. It's not that you don't want to be there or can't be there, but you're trying to prepare them to function and excel on their own. And so it's important, I think, that you have that dialogue back and forth, not only with your players, but other people, just to see, all right, where can we make up some ground here? How can we get these guys better? So that's what's important. And then it just ultimately, it always starts and then eventually ends back with the player and what he's going to choose to do with his time and how he's going to use it.
Derek, I'm assuming you guys are pretty much in the same boat.
Yeah, so our pitching coach, he's been having Zoom meetings with our guys, just kind of updating them on everything. And two, I've been doing it with the hitters as well, but it's more so of teaching these guys like how to play the game, so we may sit back and watch the 04 Yankees Red Sox game and just go through like every single pitch, every single, at bat, and just try to teach these guys like, hey, like this is why they did this, in this situation, because we had, there was a couple games on the bases, especially, we weren't too well early in the year, so just teaching guys when to tag up, when to not tag up. And so for us, it's been extremely helpful for our guys to be able to sit down, watch a game, and just study it. So, that's kind of what we've been doing.
I think you touched on an important point too, with just trying to educate the player, because just look at the panel here. There's I would say an avenue for players to go play, showcase their skill set. There's an avenue on the other side to develop as a player and do the things that you need to do. So you need all of those ingredients, and they need to be able to apply themselves out, when it counts. And so educating the player and getting those reps and doing those things and seeing the dynamic of how to play the game. We've all kind of seen that player. Maybe we've coached a guy or played with a guy that he just has an innate ability to play the game well. He may be short on tools. He may be, not the best guy on the team, but he just wins. He's just a winner, and he knows how to do those things. And it's from ways of what you're saying that I think a great idea for guys to educate themselves on a better way to prepare to play the game the next time they get out there between the white lines.
And along those lines, one of the things that kind of push the conversation a bit more forward on that is we've been talking about how a lot of people have more time on their hands on the coaching side. They have a bit more accessibility to, say, educating the player. Are there any other ways that you guys can think of that, say, coaches or guys in the recruiting position can best utilize the time they have in this kind of unique situation, whether that be educating themselves, whether that be having more interaction with trying to force the education or kind of promote the education of their own athletes, or certain situations like that?
Oh, I think for me, it's this has been a pretty good time for me, because I've had a lot of balance. I've been home with the kids. I've been working out with my wife. Doing a lot of things in the yard while taking recruiting phone calls, while talking to our current guys on our team. I think for me, it's been good because I've been in a really good routine. Still getting up early and whatnot, but kind of changing my routine with working out with my wife. That's something that we've never done. And we've been able to do it. And talking to players and talking to recruits. So I think for me, it's just getting in a different routine and kind of tweaking it a little bit, which going forward, I hope to use the routine I have now,
Got it. And along that, do you guys think that a lot of the significant changes that are occurring right now, do you think some will stick more than others? Do you think you'll force to try and stick more than others to, I know we'll get all back to our busy schedules. Do you think there are different means of the processes of what we use now that will kind of supplement your efforts moving forward? Do you think there's some that you just want to get back to right away?
One is trying to find a gym and working out, for sure. That's the number one thing for me. But I've been doing a lot of yard work and I've been finding other passions. And I've always liked yard work, but for me, just doing things, around the house. I've never really been the manly guy that can put on the tool belt and do those type of things. But now I've kind of taught myself. So if my wife says, "Hey, I need you to fix this lamp," I've taught myself through YouTube of how to fix a lamp. So for me, this time has been pretty impactful from, I guess, things away from the field, that I've been able to do.
Nice.
I think just educating yourself too, when you look at what's made available. Without PBR, we certainly wouldn't have access to a kid from Illinois, a kid from Texas, a kid from maybe Pennsylvania that has ties in Arizona. So our ability to access that player and get a better sense of what he can do in a baseball sense has been very good. So I think some of those things will remain the same. At this time, it's given us more time to kind of surf that highway and check out more players that lead to more conversations and kids too. It's a two-way street. I think it's given kids that have gone to those events access more to research universities, get a better sense of how players develop at those places, what type of environment they're going to be in. So I think there's things that we will continue to do. Certainly this time that we all have now has offered us an opportunity. I'm surprised I haven't burned up the server on D1 or PBR at this point, or other things like Driveline, where we as coaches, we try to educate ourselves and get better every day to do the same things that we ask our kids to do. So at this time, hopefully we're closing that gap in a sense from where we are to where we want to be as coaches. And I'm hoping that players are doing the same thing.
I think it may be interesting to follow what the coaches do coming out of this too. I spent 17 years at Division I, and when I got out, I really wasn't healthy. And I think some of the coaches are having this downtime now, a little bit more time with their family, are starting to realize that maybe their habits could be out of whack a little bit. And it's just nature of the game. You invest yourself so much into what's going on day to day with your players and with your team, you can neglect yourself at times. Having this time to kind of recruit differently, you may see coaches that gravitate towards doing more of that, and they can spend less time chasing and spend more time evaluating. Like Nate said, their priority guys. From a player standpoint, and I thought it was a really good point. Some of the stresses of their normal workload here in the spring have really, been negated. And we're seeing guys take jumps. One in North Carolina was a junior college guy, actually from Sanjak, was bumping 105 on a mound the other day. And, we've seen him up to 99 in junior college games based on our reports. And I saw him in high school, with a really good arm up to 92 before he went to Sanjak. And, just him having some downtime, letting his body heal, letting his body rest, really getting in great shape and throwing shorter pins may have allowed his arm strength to jump. Now, does that carry over and maintaining games? We don't know, but we may see players that say, okay, if I take more downtime, I may see more jumps. If I take more time to actually investigate how do I get better, I may see a jump, and they can withdraw a little bit from playing in 180 games a year and trying to figure out when's their best time to get better, like the coaches may do as well.
So to expand a little bit off of that and what kind of, Nate, you were saying, what would you say are maybe the best resources currently out there for, say, coaches and scouts, and then even for players in this downtime to, say, boost their education, boost their development, just kind of make their time most efficient here?
I think there's an abundance of avenues that players can look into. The key is finding out really what shoe fits. I think that a lot of times it might be the chase for velocity, it might be the chase for exit velo off the barrel. There's still some elements of how to play the game. Kendall had a chance to watch a kid that we were fortunate enough to be in the dugout with for a couple of years at my last stop. Nick Madrigal, he doesn't pass the eye test, but if you had a dugout full of him, you may never lose a game. So when you look at guys' ability to play the game, Derek touched on it earlier, watching games and educating yourself on how to do some of those things is vitally important. I took great pride when I was younger as a player. I'd watch blowouts of the Braves games. It might be 17-2 on a Sunday, and you can still learn something in the 8th, 9th inning and pick up something that's going to help further on down the road. So I think that the kids that maybe go through, say, Driveline, certainly the flat ground apps, you're seeing players that are giving information back to try to help guys out. Trevor Bauer has a platform that he uses as well. I think those things are great. And even just if a player logs into PBR and he's in his own state and he goes and he looks at another player that maybe he hasn't played against or he's heard of and he takes a look, they have the draft every year. College coaches sign guys every year in the next incoming class. So sometimes your competition is not just out in front of you, but it's also behind you. It's those guys that they're chasing up behind you, and you're seeing guys reclassify into different classes. Somebody's going to move up a class from the 21 to the 20 class. Those guys are coming from everywhere. So I think it's important that at this time that you're seeing some of these kids, and I think it's really, really going to be apparent when this lifts and we get a chance to get back out on the field, who's been using their time wisely. And Brandon had mentioned it earlier based on what I'd said. I just think that the stressors, kids are in bed now, they're eating 3 normal meals, they're not running through a drive-through. There's just a lot of things that are in their favor to get better. Hopefully I would say the mental side of that approach and the understanding of how to apply some of the things also comes into play, because just because this guy throws plyos and he throws 95 doesn't mean that that's exactly what I should be doing either. And it's important for kids to understand that.
A quick question for Kendall. It's kind of been going in another direction, but I saw a tweet from you either yesterday or a couple of days ago about a conference, a mid-major conference. I think it was the MAC, banging their conference tournament for the next 4 years. For mostly cost-cutting measures, which makes sense. But have you heard any rumblings of any other like mid-major conferences talking about doing the same thing, or schools even taking another step and just like suspending baseball programs, indefinitely until they start to get, kids back on campus, tuition money rolling back in, college football revenue coming back in? Like where do you think the state of like mid-major schools are in that regard?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think certainly when this started, I think a lot of people kind of just assumed that, these small schools, they're just going to get rid of their programs through all this. And, so far that has not happened. I'm not going to say that won't happen anywhere. But so far it looks pretty good. So we'll see how that, I don't want to speak on absolutes on that because, what might seem like a good situation today may totally change in a couple of weeks. I saw Akron cut several programs, and they did not cut baseball. Of course, they just cut baseball and then brought it back. But as Derek knows from being a former MAC guy, like it's not like Akron's getting much support from their administration to begin with. So that's a little bit different scenario. But, we'll see on whether or not programs get cut. I have no doubt. I mean, whether it's Derek or Nate, there are going to be programs that are absolutely going to cut costs. I was just talking to a coach of a, premier Big Ten school the other day that said that, they'll more than likely have to bus everywhere early in the season as opposed to going down to Florida, as I usually do. So there are going to be a lot of differences in terms of cost-cutting measures. You mentioned the MAC, the SoCon, and the A10 have now come out saying they are not doing full conference tournaments next year. They're just going to do the 4 top teams and then go have a conference tournament. I expect other conferences to follow. I think these mid-major leagues will start following that same kind of framework. But I'll go back to this as well. Like, I think there's a legitimate argument against conference tournaments. And actually, I kind of want to get Derek's take on this because he was at a MAC school. But, I mean, Kent State is a perfect example. That's a program that historically just dominates the MAC. And, there are a lot of years where that program, their RPIs in the 50s, and they're just not going to get the benefit of the doubt for whatever reason. They've been to Omaha, but they just don't get the benefit of the doubt. They get to the championship of a tournament, lose to, Ball State or whoever, and all of a sudden they don't get in. So I think you will see these conference tournaments not only trim. I think we'll get to a point where these leagues will say, you know what, like, why are we wasting money on a conference tournament? Let's just put our best team in there and go for it.
Yeah, no, you're right, Kendall. So when I was at Kent, the year before I got there, they actually went 44-16. They had a round pitcher on the mound, and they lost to the 7th seed, Western Michigan, who I think they maybe won 30 games, if that. And so that was the conference representative, for the regional. And Kent went like 20-4 in the regular season, just blew by everybody, So, in a situation like that, I mean, you definitely want to take the best team. But at the same time, I've been at Kennesaw State where we were the 3 seed and we won our conference tournament, and then we go on to go to a super regional. So I've seen it on both sides, but it's definitely tough. I think in the MAC situation, they probably do need to take the regular season winner just because, over a whole stretch of a season, you can see, at least in that league, who the best team is.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just
going to say, a great example is Arizona last year. When you look at the Wildcats, they were one of the hottest teams in the country at the end of the season. And, had the Pac-12 had a tournament, they could have gotten in there, won a few games and gotten the tournament, but they didn't because there wasn't a conference tournament. So it's interesting. I was gonna ask you guys real quick, and we're actually more of a comment, and we can kind of move on to something else. I know you guys are tired of hearing me. But when you look at college baseball, you guys kind of talked about the, doing the Driveline, the plyo stuff, learning the game. But I'm really excited to see college baseball in 2021 because, as you guys mentioned, it's so important right now to be learning. And think about these. You look at historically in college baseball, the mid majors that have been really good. Coastal Carolina won the national championship. What did they have? A lot of seniors. And so, these programs, Kent State, when they got to Omaha, they were an old club. And so, when you look at these teams, man, they're going to be so. We talked about the Power Fives that have players coming back, but how about these mid majors that might have, because they're not going to get drafted in the top 5 rounds. So these mid majors that are going to have, 8 seniors returning, you're going to have a lot of good mid major teams next year because they're going to know all the ropes. They've got an extra, if they're doing Driveline stuff, they've got an extra 6-7 months of doing all Driveline stuff. There are going to be some really, really good teams out there, and I think there will be a team or two in Omaha that otherwise we wouldn't predict there.
Yeah, Kendall, I agree with that, especially with the transfer rule coming up soon. There's only 9 spots on the field, and as much as those Power Fives will be helped, those big premium programs, the SEC is going to be really good. Well, some northern mid-major schools are going to get a lot of those guys who, hey, I need to play. No matter what, I need to get on the field. My goal is to go to the big leagues. I need to get some innings on the mound. I know I was kind of a product of that. I went to a mid-major school, got a ton of innings, and it really helped me out. I mean, schools across, I think Illinois State, great talent level in the Midwest. They got a great program. Kids can go there. Down by you, Kendall, Sam Houston State. Not to step on Nate's toes, but GCU, Grand Canyon, has a good program. There's a lot of talent there in Southern California. Fullerton, obviously, Irvine. Those schools will all be aided in that. But I really like the regionalization of stuff because a program like Kent, Wright State, those are power programs. Those are really good clubs that have talented players. And the one advantage they will have that the Power 5 programs may not is they're not going to be playing against an SEC schedule or a Pac-12 schedule or ACC schedule. They're going to kind of play each other, and then the top will rise, whereas LSU is going to have to go through the gauntlet. Arkansas goes through the gauntlet, and Arizona goes through the gauntlet. Those guys may have a little bit more fresher legs in the end.
The challenge that I think that'll be, and Kendall can probably speak to this the best, is how are they going to factor in the RPI since teams can't go play each other so much anymore? You know, if you're taking a northern school that travels down to Florida and maybe picks up a game against Miami, a game against Florida on the way out, and then hits, let's say, Georgia or Georgia Tech on their way home, they've played some quality opponents. Let's just say that they play 4 of those teams and they happen to win 2 of them. That's going to bode well in the RPI. Well, now, unfortunately, they're being forced, based on the circumstances, to play somebody close proximity-wise who's typically not an RPI, assisted type team. And how are we going to factor that in? Because there are going to be, as there is every year, certain teams that are left out that have a great argument to say, we deserve to be in this. And so how do we get to that point to allow those guys to say, okay, now we go. One thing that I had discussed with a guy the other day was if everything's going to stay regionalized and teams weren't necessarily interested in having a conference tournament per se, why not take those 8 type of bubble teams, find a kind of localized spot for all those guys to go to, and then just play each other, and then just let them duke it out in that sense at the end in kind of their own de facto tournament. And now all of a sudden you might pull a team out of there where you start getting hot, and before you know it, it's one of those teams, as Kendall mentioned, Kent State some years ago, that you get out at the right time and you go. But that'll help those teams out from an RPI standpoint.
Yeah, what's going to be really interesting to me, guys, as well, is like, you just look at the landscape of football right now. I mean, we'll see what happens, but, you're talking about the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC playing, potentially the Pac-12 not playing. We're playing an abbreviated schedule. Well, let's just say that some schools in the MAC and, some schools in the Big Ten, Dunk mentioned Northwestern. Well, if Northwestern, let's say Northwestern has, stipulations on students coming back, and let's say they won't let them play non-conference. Well, one of the benefits to the RPI, and I'm all for it because these teams spend the first month of the season on the road, is programs like Indiana and like Michigan. When they go on the road the first month and a half of the season, what happens? They get a lot of RPI points for doing so. Well, what happens if all of a sudden Indiana can't go anywhere the first 3 weeks of the season? What happens to their RPI at that point? So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this all affects college baseball, not only in recruiting, roster management, but also just in the kind of the practicality of the schedule. There are a lot of things at play here.
I think what's also going to be interesting with some of the mid-majors is, you're talking about schools that already probably have some experience handling, how to develop players on a constrained budget, how to recruit pretty well virtually because they just don't have the travel budget as some of these other schools. And now you're talking about them potentially getting better players than they would have had in the past, just because you're going to have a lot of seniors coming back from the draft and just like an influx of really, really good players. So, you're potentially going to see, like a Kent State, a Wright State, some of these schools get better players and already have some experience developing players with less tech than, say, a Power 5 with a more constrained budget. So I think, there could be a really good opportunity for some of these schools that already have experience with that to kind of really make a push.
Yeah, and I'll add this too real quick. And Brandon kind of touched on this, and I already know who he's talking about. He's talking about Luke Little in the comment about the 105. But when you look at who this whole situation affects, PBR does an awesome job at JUCO, and I would say junior college are really going to benefit. If the one-time transfer rule does not pass as not expected to here in the next week, guess what? All these freshmen, all these sophomores, whether it's – and I'm not just throwing these teams under the bus, but like whether it's Arkansas or Texas Tech and they've got 52 guys on campus in the fall, well, those freshmen and sophomores, they got to go somewhere. And so where are they going to go? They're going to go to San Jack. They're going to go to, Central Arizona. They're going to go to all these different JUCO programs. So in addition to the, let's say the top 5-round quality high school player who just decides, you know what, like I just don't like where they're, the money that they're talking about I could potentially get if they take me here. So you know what, I'm going to go to JUCO for a year. You have those guys, and oh, by the way, you got all these college guys who have nowhere to go than junior colleges. So I think junior college baseball is going to be outstanding in the spring as well.
To piggyback off that, I actually talking to some parents that we've dealt with. One of the things we may actually see too in the next 2 years is talented players staying closer to home. So, in North Carolina, not that big a deal. We've got a ton of schools in this area in the Southeast. I think a lot of the Southeastern kids stay at home. But I know Illinois and Indiana and Ohio and Pennsylvania and the East Coast are just raided by schools year after year after year. But I'm not real sure mom and dad want their baby boy traveling, 17 hours away from home and then not knowing what's going to happen. And something I actually saw, I think, and Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's University of Arizona has already set up for their returning students an infirmary. So if somebody gets sick, they have somewhere to put them. And talking to some other schools, it's something that a lot of schools haven't even thought of. If Johnny gets sick and now we've got to get him out of the public, we got to get him in quarantine. Where do we put him? And Arizona's addressed it already, and I think that's one of the reasons they can start talking about bringing kids back on campus. But from a parent standpoint, they're going to want control of their kids, and they're going to want to be closer to home, which from a college baseball standpoint means you may see some powers jump in some non-traditional areas because there's, you look at the draft, California, Texas, Georgia, Florida, always at the high end, but a state that a lot of people always forget is Illinois. Illinois is usually in that top 4, top 5 in terms of number of prospects drafted. And what happens if all those players, instead of going south or instead of going west, all of them stay home? What powers develop out of that?
Yeah, I think you make a couple interesting points when you look at it. In our situation, Dr. Robbins has got a really comprehensive plan that he's laying out and really looking at it through the eyes of a parent. How would when I turn my kid loose and he's going to go somewhere, who are the people that are going to be looking after him? Is he going to be okay, not just between the white lines, because he's going to spend a fraction of his time there, but the majority of his time outside the white lines? And what does that look like? Coming on the heels of everything that we're going through right now, once this starts to open back up for everybody, people are going to need to feel comfortable with those decisions, as you said, Brandon, because there's more to it than just, is this breaking ball getting better? How's the 60 time doing? We're looking at a comprehensive approach to not only player, but personal development. And you have to take those things into account. So I think the points that you make are very valid. I think that the pendulum just swings both ways. I think you're going to see it affects some areas in a positive way. It's going to affect some areas in a negative fashion. But those that it affects negatively, it may be affecting others positively just because of that shift.
Sure. And along those lines, when we're talking about, say, things that people haven't even thought of or concerns that are going to prop up, are there anything specific that you think that people aren't talking enough about? And along those lines, how do you think we should adjust things moving forward, or even just think of things in a different light? And I guess this is open to anyone.
I would say for me, what kind of concerns me going forward is, yes, they did extend the dead period, but then how far more are they going to extend it? And let's say we don't recruit all summer, and then we're able to recruit August 1, and then our players come back on campus and we have unlimited rosters, and we only have 4 coaches with, let's say, 45 to 50 guys on a team, and 1 coach has got to be out recruiting, and then you've got 3 at home. So it's I don't know. It just seems like a lot. It just seems like a lot going forward. It does. So I don't know what the answer is, but, I just know that, that there's only 4 coaches per staff, and, the more they back up this dead period, it's going to back up a lot of things. So I don't know where we're going forward, but, that is a concern, at least for me.
I would think having more practice days during the fall added to that fall schedule, if you have one, and perhaps coming back in the spring, opening things up earlier. I've talked to some schools who are having fall athletes stay on campus for summer school. They're the only people allowed to be on campus. I don't know if you could do that for spring athletes coming back from winter break, but that's something I would want to consider, more playing time.
Derek, don't worry about the recruiting piece. We'll help you out there.
Appreciate it.
We got you hooked up.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think the recruiting will take a different shape too. You're looking at players that may not be committing earlier. That has been the trend over the last decade or so. And now you're going to see better kids pushing back into, I'll say my day when I played. That's when guys were getting recruited going into their senior year. Some of them didn't even get seen until their senior year of high school.
Yeah.
And we're committing to good schools. And so,
but I think there's a gap though in like what is going to be reality and what people are still going to be doing. When you're talking about the younger prospect, right? Like people are going to say, okay, I'm going to commit as a 23 or 24. You're going to see those commitments. And the fact of the matter is, like, everyone's talking about like the woe is me 2000, the 2020 player that, got shortchanged in the recruiting. I think what people aren't really talking about is the 2021s and what's going to happen to that class. I think there's going to be just extraordinary collateral damage, which I hope I'm wrong, but it's just basic math. When you're talking about like these verbal commitments that aren't going to be verbal commitments, and I think that is just going to continue to get backed up. So I tell every good player, it's like, there's no rush. If you're good, you're going to have an offer. And that money is still going to be there. So the players ultimately holds all the cards if you're good, right? Like but I think there's a antsiness in the industry of making that social media commitment and, getting it out there. And it's all it is. It's a social media commitment at this. I mean, it's probably a verbal agreement between two humans. But things change pretty fast in those verbal commitments. So anyway, I think that's one of in the recruiting side, the 2021s and what's going to happen to that class is going to be really interesting to watch.
Combine
one thing I was kind of curious about.
With that.
Go ahead, Shooter.
I was going to say, combine the transfer rule with that, it's going to change the entire landscape.
Hey, you hopped on late, Shooter, but Kendall says that transfer rule is not happening.
But
so I know you're a show and go guy.
January.
So yeah.
But next year when it comes in, that'll affect 21 because building your class on the back of high school kids versus a transfer guy, like that stuff that is going to happen. Breaking my balls here.
Show and go, baby. That's what you are.
Just throw a hat on.
No, I was just going to say, by the way, I do appreciate the Michael Jordan jersey in the background, Shooter. But, one thing I was going to ask Nate and Derek as well, I was reading something about football recruiting yesterday, a couple of days ago, and a lot of these kids, like we all are, like we're kind of stir crazy. So what they're finding out, a lot of these kids are just like committing. They had a list of schools, and they're just like, I guess they're stir crazy or whatnot. They haven't even gone on any visits. But they're like, okay, I'm committing to Tennessee. Like the University of Tennessee has been like very, very aggressive in football recruiting. So like, I guess from a baseball standpoint, is there a concern with baseball coaches that some of these kids that, I saw another one today to an SEC school, some of these kids that are committing for baseball, like, is there a big concern that a lot of these kids in the fall, when they can start taking trips, are again all of a sudden going to say, you know what, maybe I don't want to go to Oregon State or, or wherever, is there a concern with that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I had a conversation with a gentleman at one point, and he just, I think I'm ready to make a decision here pretty soon. Okay, well, how are those conversations going? Well, Coach, I don't really have a lot of offers. In fact, I don't have any, but maybe just one. And okay, so I mean, every kid's going to look at something a little bit different. You look at some other guys, and they may discuss it. Hey, Coach, I'm gonna take my visits. I'm gonna do the things that I need to do. So different strokes for different folks in that sense when it comes down to that process. But I think kind of to tie in what Sean was mentioning about the 21s, it'll be interesting, and it's all going to be a trickle-down effect from the draft and how that gets framed first. Once that gets framed in a certain fashion and you start looking at how that's going to play down, now you've got kids that were sophomores this year that'll be draft-eligible sophomores by rule next year. How many rounds are available for guys to move? And then you'll have the incoming kids that are of age that make it to college that'll be draft-eligible sophomores the next year. It may take a year or two to kind of iron itself out. I think it will, but I do think that there will be some transitional pieces moving with guys, and we've seen some of it. I know, Kendall, you update it pretty regularly with your tracker with guys transferring. It's just the pieces are always moving, and I just think that it's more visible now because everybody's life isn't particularly chaotic. So what you can see is when a guy commits somewhere and a kid looks at it and goes, well, I'm better than that guy, and he starts getting antsy, there are some places that will play on those I guess, for lack of a better word, just insecurities that, hey, you're going to have to hurry up and make a decision before you don't have an offer. And I really feel for the families that go through that, because you should make an educated decision. There's still going to be some movement pieces when you look at, is that coach going to be at that institution the following year? So there's a lot of things that come into play, and I hope that families are taking this time to educate themselves as much as possible. Back again, not only to the player development side of things, but how I'm going to develop personally, and is that environment going to be conducive to accomplish those things?
One thing that for any parents that are seeing this, it's okay to ask tough questions. I sat in a recruiting coordinator seat for 14 years, and I promise you that, as a recruiting coordinator, I met with more student athletes and was in more of those rooms and trying to decide what the offers were going to be and what the recruiting visit was going to be like than the players ever go through. We'd do more in a month than you'll do in a lifetime. I have experience at it, and most parents don't ask hard enough questions. Most parents are walking on eggshells. They don't want to upset staff. So I'm not saying go in there, head down and bull rushing coaches and staffs like that, but like Coach is referencing, it's okay to find out about player development. It's okay to find out about travel. It's okay to find out about what if my son gets sick, what is going to happen to him, what's the school going to do. And those aren't necessarily easy questions to ask from a coach's standpoint all the time or answer, but it's okay to ask them. And I think sometimes parents go through this process and they're so worried about upsetting the meeting with the coach. If that happens, it probably is not the right spot to be anyway. And most of the coaches that you want your son playing for are willing to answer those questions. Some questions may not necessarily be fair. Are you going to be here next year? I don't know if I'm going to be here next week. So, I'm going to give you an answer, but I don't know if that's a fair question, and we're going to give you the answer you want. But diving into how they're going to develop your son, diving into how they're going to graduate your son, those are fair questions, especially when you're talking about spending, even if you're on a decent scholarship, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Yeah, right, Brandon. And I think for us, what we've kind of been able to do from a recruiting standpoint is, like the Zoom meetings we do with our hitters, I may do that with a recruit. So I may take them through a track profile and show them, what we do with our guys on a daily basis. I may show them our bat system, whatever it may be. So I think from a recruiting standpoint, Sean, you're absolutely right. I think the 2021 class is going to be hit extremely hard by this. But for us, Twitter has been awesome. Just seeing a kid taking some swings in a cage. I may reach out to a kid that in a territory that I would really never reach out to, and just say, hey, like, you ever thought about coming to Indiana? So I think this time it's been hard, but at the same time, I've been able to do some things that I would have normally not done.
And to build off of that, I guess it's a good kind of segue into, you mentioned track and you mentioned Twitter and you mentioned like kind of new age forms of even promoting what you guys do as a program, or even just what people have the access to. What do you guys think are maybe the most significant ways that, say, data, technology, or kind of like the new age of baseball and the progression of that is going to be making, say, your jobs as scouts, recruiters much easier, especially when it comes to the athlete's perspective?
Well, I think, for us, with every kid throwing 93, it seems like, if I were able to call a summer coach and say, hey, tell me what you got. And he's like, hey, I got a kid that's 93, I think the new age technology, has helped. Like, what's that 93 look like? Is it a high spin rate? Is it low spin rate? Is he going to sink it? Is he going to spin it? I may watch a hitter in the cage and say, oh, he's got elite hand speed. But, going through TrackMan or Rapsodo, the new technology, it confirms, everything that maybe I thought, in a player. So, the technology has helped us tremendously, especially from recruiting. When you go to Lake Point and you see a kid that's 92 and you go up top to the press box and you say, hey, what's the TrackMan profile look like? It's definitely changed in recruiting. I don't think a coach can no longer say, hey, I got a guy that's 92, because the first thing I'm going to ask is, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think you got to know how it connects too. I remember running into Sean, talking to him at one of his events a couple of years ago, and hey, this guy's got pretty good stuff, but it just doesn't play. It just doesn't get in there. And so the technology gives you some insight to those areas. I jokingly talk to people about what they've seen out there, and one guy had mentioned, he goes, man, if you're looking for a good arm and you're in a pro organization, just pull up flat ground apps. You'll see a guy going 94, 97 that's looking for a job. And so you got to find guys kind of in that old school methodology of talking to guys who will tell you, like, hey, this guy can spin it, and he can spin it at will. He can throw it for strikes. He can do some of the things that just the nature of the game kind of unfold, a little bit of that it factor. Can that guy get it done in the crunch in some of those bigger games? And that's where it's nice to be able to go to events and watch guys play and get a better sense of, how's this guy going to handle himself? Because last week he wasn't very good. And now we see this week, okay, he's certainly better. And then maybe you can delve into it a little bit deeper. Maybe it was a pitcher dealing with a blister on his finger. Maybe it was a hitter who maybe he tweaked his back just because his family was camping for the previous couple of weeks, and he just didn't have the training time underneath his belt. So, the data certainly gives us some direction to look, but then we have to ask the right questions and realize how those things connect. So it certainly is important, I think, for us to take into account both sides of that equation, because if you're just looking at data to look at data, again, I don't think that gives you a clear path to the understanding of the player. And I don't think that if you're just watching a guy play, some guys might have a great arsenal and they don't know how to use it. I had a young man that played for me. He got released from an organization. Later that year, he was in AAA after not pitching in A-ball for the previous organization. And he'd never pitched above A-ball in his entire career. And it just really boiled down to the organization saying, listen, you've been trying these 4 things. The 2 that you've been doing over here, get rid of them. These other 2, I want you to do this more often. And he just skyrocketed. So, trying to impart that wisdom on our players and use it, and then try to get it from events such as PBR when they put those on. It's great. It's great to see those things.
And Derek and Nate, you guys won't have to go up in the tower to check the TrackMan data. That stuff will be in player profiles coming this summer. So with some advanced analytics in there. So that's something that we've been seeing. This is the direction of everything. So if you could watch the video, maybe with a couple more camera angles, layer in the analytics with some player performance on the, some history on the player performance, you could paint a fairly decent picture on a player. I mean, granted, you need to see him play more and more, and can he pitch? Can he play the game? But it'll help check some boxes moving forward. So we're pretty excited about that, and having to enlist Driveline to kind of decode the analytics for the players, because the players will receive that too. And I think there's a huge educational piece to all this, right? Like, here's all these numbers. No one understands what they really mean. I mean, there's a base understanding of spin, right? There's a base understanding of bat speed and all that, but like, to really understand, this is what it means, and this is how you could get better, and also how you could, help players get recruited and present a greater value to the player that are coming to our events. So we're really excited about that, and hopefully you won't have to walk up the Lake Point stairs anymore. You might want to enjoy the air conditioning up there, but besides that, you can just check your phone. And we're going to try to do, and it'll be on the scoreboard too. So
I think Derek, you're spot on talking about the new metrics of it, but with you calling guys outside the region, where now if you're not able to get on the road until August 1st and they keep the same deadlines, you have 2 weeks, right? It gets shut down. Now, Nate, the same way, Arizona, that's a national program. They got Pennsylvania kids on the roster. They go all over the country. I only have 14 days. I can't waste my time going to see this kid pitch in North Carolina, who the coach told me is up to 90. But if I have TrackMan readings and his induced vertical break is here, and he's backspinning the baseball this way, and I can see what the curveball does, now I'm going to go see it with my eyes, because I think in the end, you guys are going to want to see it with your eyes. So yes, you want the coach to be at your game, but they need to build their follow list first. And that window is going to shrink quickly if you don't have those numbers.
I think you're accurate, because that's the last kind of box to be checked. As coaches, we have to sign off on that player. And there are things that speak to us when we watch them play. Maybe it's an old coach that we talk to. Maybe it's a team that they played against, and that guy says, hey, listen, that's one of the best arms we've seen all year. And that you find out that this guy has a performance history, I think, as Sean said, where you see that this guy's been doing this place after place. So when those things come into play, it's huge, because now you've got a platform that PBR is providing. You've got an avenue that Driveline's providing with how to get better, which now puts the ball back in the court for the player to have to educate himself and say, okay, now, all right, this kid down the street in my league, he's got an offer and I don't. Why? Our metrics kind of look the same. Well, what does this really mean? And now you start looking into some of the other layers that we take into consideration as coaches when it's evaluating a player. Is he a good student? Is he a good teammate? Is he a worker? Are there a lot of things that resonate with different coaches? And what's nice is I think that this collaboration that Sean is discussing that's being put together or is in place is going to be really a big jump start, I think, to push the sport in a good direction and really kind of hold kids more accountable at a younger age. Because if they want the offer and they're 15 years old, they need to be in place and ready to back that up, because they're not going to step foot on campus until they're 18. So that agreement in place is that we're making an assumption that you're going to continue to improve, do the things that you need to do on and off the field. And so now when you get here, okay, we're ready to perform at a high level. And now it's our job again to continue to fill in those gaps and help further their career.
Time can build trust, and time can build awareness. And I can remember Driveline, maybe their first or second year, and they were kind of posting things on Twitter, and I'm sitting in my office in Charlotte going, yeah, right, that dude was 84, now he's 91, I hear you, whatever. And now you get to know and you see what the processes are. And I can remember calling Kyle maybe in year 2 and going, okay, what is it you guys are doing? And he kind of walked me through it about 30 minutes on the phone, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And I felt like at that point, we're doing a pretty good job at Charlotte building pitchers, and I'm way behind. And, you fast forward 10 years, whatever it's been, and now there's this trust in Driveline because there's been, time after time after time, we're seeing the sequencing, we're seeing what's happening, we're seeing evidence of the players getting better. That's the first part of the data, and there's trust in where what the data is saying. And I think college coaches are at that point, with the TrackMan knowledge that most have now. The next part is coaches identifying what they develop off those numbers. And I'm lucky enough to know the University of Arizona strength guy very well, Jim Crumpos, and I know that I can bring in physically weaker guys that maybe have really good arm speed. It's clean. The body type says they're going to develop, and I can put them with Crumpos, and those guys are going to get better, and those guys are going to see jumps. And how does that project out on TrackMan? How does that project out with spin rates and induced vertical break? We learn those things because we have players come through programs, and we get to watch players that preceded the players we're recruiting now. And so with that time, coaches can also develop how they're going to recruit off these numbers. And the way Indiana attacks a hitter and the way Arizona attacks a hitter may be different because of the communication skills that Coach Simmons has with his hitters. And maybe Arizona does some different things with their hitters. They may recruit different types of guys, but you look up in 3 or 4 years and they both go, out of the 2 guys that we chose, one went here, one went there, we picked the right guy. And both of them are saying that because their guy got better in their system with the way they go about their confidence level, understanding that data. And I think that's the point we're at now too with some of the coaches across the country is they can look at the numbers and they can also look at them and say, this guy has a chance to get better here because we've had guys like this in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's one of the things I was going to bring up was just this is just all allowing you to recruit what you can develop better. So if you're a place that's really, really confident in your ability to develop velocity, then maybe you can better prioritize identifying athletes that have plus command and have a feel for spin and can put the ball in the zone and don't walk guys because you're confident if you get them on campus over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, you can add some ticks to the heater. And I think it works the same way for the player as well, right? Going to an event like PBR and getting all of this information just allows them to go, all right, it's pretty clear that I can throw it pretty hard, but I just don't have a second or third pitch that are really plus offerings, and I don't spin it particularly well. And maybe that athlete now goes, I want to kind of prioritize schools that have a track record of leveraging TrackMan data, doing pitch design work, and developing secondary offerings, because that's the thing that's really going to prevent me from, getting a shot to play professionally.
Yeah, I think it all goes back to, from a coaching perspective, I think it all goes back to just having an identity for your staff or for your lineup. Just, all right, this is the kind of guy that I like. These are the kind of guys that are successful in my program, and then just like doubling down on that identity and making sure that your players are aware of like what you're trying to build from year to year.
Yeah, I think Shearer and Kendall are probably pretty hypersensitive to what that is too, because of, the business that we're in. Kendall bounces around the country and he knows what team dynamics look like, what head coaches' styles are, and what those things tend to be. I know Shooter being a player and then transitioning over into looking at players that are looking to find a home now, and where he can tell you probably in 2 seconds, hey, that's going to be a great fit for that kid, or gosh, you know what, I don't know if that's the best idea for that guy based on what I know of that program or that player or the combination of the two. So it's interesting to, as you outlined, you're looking at how do you connect? What is your identity? I think a lot of players don't understand what that is. Sometimes they feel good, they get sold on something rather than, no, the number one object as a player is to continue to get better, because you could grow up being a Yankees fan. If you're going to top out in Double-A with the Yankees, but you really don't like the Marlins, yet you're going to pitch in the big leagues for the Marlins one day because maybe they're going to do it a little bit different that aligns with your development. That's what kids need to be doing nowadays when they're looking at it. Brandon mentioned when he'd reached out and started kind of researching Driveline. I'd been looking at stuff for 10 years because I couldn't figure out, all right, I want to get better. I want to do some things. I want to make some jumps. When I had originally reached out to Kyle, there was nobody on the radar. You know, we were the first school to really kind of get in there and implement those things. The 3 key arms that we had at that time, 2 of them have already pitched in the big leagues, and 1 probably would have this year. And they all still use a lot of those training modalities that were in place, that were introduced to them at a younger age. And 2 of them were fortunate enough in their organizations that those organizations adopted those, understood them, promoted them. 1 of them did not. And now he's moved to another organization that fits that shoe a little bit better for him. So it's interesting to see how the whole thing begins to unfold, because what will be the next level of training? What will be the next push with guys on? I still think it goes back to just time management, how players are going to use their time. Are they going to use it to develop in areas where they need to, or are they going to hopefully see that, hey man, I'm ranked the number 7th player in the state of Ohio, and that's good enough for me. You know, you're going to want to continue to get better.
Yeah, and Nate, I think this is pushed. I mean, Driveline's done a great job of progressing the game, but not just the player, not just the coaches, but the scouts. Everybody has to take their game to another level. And if you're a good coach, you're trying to get better the entire time. There's a reason why you guys were so successful, and you were not just satisfied to rest on your laurels, to move to the next level, the same way players are. But along the lines of what you were saying, yeah, I definitely see there's types of players for each program. And I won't name them, but there's certain guys where I see this guy's super athletic and moves really well. He's a multi-sport kid. There are certain schools where that kid just fits. It's a no-brainer. He's going there. And there's sometimes where kids go to the school and it's like, I feel bad because he's probably going to have to bounce back at some point. So even going back to the 21s, those are guys that we think about more so internally where, okay, this guy, is he going to get axed because the rules are changing? What's a good fit for him if this happens? We're talking about that internally all the time. Like, this guy I really like, he became available again. Okay, let's try to find him a fit. But Tosh, getting back to the tracking and stuff, just progressing the game and becoming better overall. It's baseball for so long was so old time and stuck in its roots, and it still can be. And there's not all that much that's wrong with it. It's a great game. But pushing it to that next level and continue to make the players better, and the coaches and the scouts and the writers is a big deal. Shoot, I even see Kendall throwing out RPMs and advanced metrics on his writing now.
So from a scouting and recruiting perspective, at the amateur level, you're dealing with 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. I've been doing this a long time. I could think of numerous times where I'll come back to the office. I'm like, yeah, this kid's the best player in the state. He threw 80% strikes, hitting 92. And then the guy next to me is like, I saw him 2 weeks ago. He was garbage. Couldn't throw a strike. He was, 84, 85. I mean, you just never know when you're dealing with 15, 16-year-old kids about what they did the day before. And there's so many just the vagaries of being a teenage kid, right? And then from a scouting perspective, I think it makes it a lot easier to like validate your eye. Like, hey, this kid looks really straight, and it's 86, but yet every player is swinging through this fastball. Are these hitters that bad, or what's the deal? And then it just kind of validates what you see, or gives you more. I guess it gives you more of a safety net too from a recruiting scouting perspective. Like, hey, the data is telling you is matching up with your eye, or maybe it's not matching up with your eye, but it gives you another something to consider, at least when you're only able to see a player a few times at tops. I mean, a lot of times things are being, at the higher levels of recruiting, there's a lot of snap decisions being made. You leave the ballpark and you're like, hit the yes button on this, right? And you make a call, and so I don't know. That's what we're really, really excited about, is kind of pairing up the scouting and the data.
One thing I think is really cool. Go ahead. No, one thing I think is really cool, Sean, is with this Driveline and TrackMan thing you guys have going on, is it's kind of like the story Tosh and the crew did on the Jack Leftwich and Tommy Mace for our site at Florida. Is like, you could take a kid. Let's say a kid goes to the Florida event and let's just, I had no idea if it's there yet, but let's just say there's TrackMan and Driveline stuff there where they're tracking the progressions of pitchers and whatnot. Well, if you're a recruiter like Nate and guys like Derek, you can actually take a kid from, let's say, June 1, go back, let's just assume he's like a 22 or something, or 23. You can actually take what he did in June, look at what he does at a fall event, and basically be able to kind of look at his hot zones and things like that and kind of figure out, like, hey, how is he progressing with the fastball, or how is he progressing with the slider? And I think in a sport like college baseball, where you're only spreading the wealth to 11.7 scholarships, man, that's a huge deal to me. And if I'm a coach, to be able to have pretty, just actual data, and you're not so much just taking a shot in the wind. What kind of progressions that guy's making, and it can be year to year too. It doesn't have to be from June to November. It can be from the last year to this year. I think it's pretty beneficial. Honestly, it's pretty awesome.
When I think it's going to benefit the player is what I was saying earlier. Just in, we all have examples. I can think back, and Kendall, you saw Brandon Neisser throw, Shooter Hunt. You've seen him throw as well, and he was a guy that we had to go old school data with because he was pitching in his high school league in the summer, and there wasn't the access to the information. So it was ball, strike, breaking ball, change up, strike, and you're going through it. He just didn't meet a lot of the metrics at that time. He's 83, 84 miles an hour. But you watch him 3 games in a row, you finally throw the radar gun out and you go, okay, well, if this guy can get stronger and do some of these things better, because at the end of the day, he would still strike out 14 a game. And you go, well, you know what? We got to take this into consideration. Whereas what Sean's saying is if you've got the data that's more in place, we find out later on through the metrics that you guys put on D1, Kendall, that this guy, he was at the top of the leaderboard almost every week with regards to the analytics. So, it just closes that gap. It really allows guys to do, I think, their job better. It creates a more efficient manner and to get it done. And I think it helps players find a home where they belong and where they can kind of, I think, thrive and survive. Because if a guy doesn't meet those things and somebody reaches on a guy because they really needed somebody, saw him on a good day and did that knee-jerk reaction to pull the trigger on him, now he gets on campus, he's in over his head, and then 9 months later he's finding himself in a new place, in a new environment, trying to make it stick and work there. So I think it irons out a lot of wrinkles.
Absolutely. So I think that's all the time we got for today. I really appreciate everything you guys brought to this. Really appreciate all the time you gave. So thanks again.
Thanks, Tosh.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together, Tosh. Good stuff.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.